Alright guys, so in this video what we're going to do is we're going to create a drafting view, and the drafting view that we're going to create is actually located on Blackboard, and it's under course documents. It's called beam/girder to column connection. And so what we're going to do here is we're just going to create a simple two-dimensional draft of a connection. And the reason we make two-dimensional drafts in Revit is because the 3D model that we're creating is giving more an idea of the general layout and the shapes that you're going to use for your structure and all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't get as detailed as drawing connections or really in-depth details of certain things such as wall sections. So instead what we'll do is we'll draw two-dimensional details, and then we'll call out where these details occur on our three-dimensional project. So to create a new drafting view, you'll go to View right here, the View tab up top, and you'll go to Drafting View. So again, we're just going to call this beam/column to, or beam/girder, excuse me, if I can type, to column connection. Okay, and we can leave the scale at 1/4 of an inch equals a foot for now, and we can kind of play with it later to see what works best. So we'll hit OK there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through our project browser here and try to find where it created this view. So anytime you create a new view, it's in your project browser somewhere, and Revit just sticks to the defaults of where to put it, so sometimes it's kind of hard to find it. So if you make a new drafting view, and this isn't always the case, but I'm assuming it threw it in your coordination, and then under question mark, question mark, question mark there, you can see that there's our new drafting view here. If we want to rearrange how it's organized in our project browser, we can do that through its discipline and its subdiscipline. So you see the disciplines that are loaded into our project so far are architectural, structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and coordination. We're going to be doing a structural connection, so let's give this a discipline of structural. And you can see the subdisciplines that we've already done. We have 3D views, floor plans, elevations, structural column plan. None of those are really useful for what we're trying to portray. So let's make our own subdiscipline. Let's call it 500. Or actually, let's call it 000. Again, it doesn't matter. You can call it whatever you want. It's your organizational structure. I'm just going to call it 000 details. Okay, so now you'll see instead of this drawing being under coordination and question marks, it's under structural and details. Again, it's just your way of organizing your project. So this obviously isn't essential, but I would strongly suggest doing it because once we start creating a lot of different views, we'll have plumbing views, structural views, and a lot of detail views. You're going to want a good organizational structure for this so you can find these different views very easily. Okay, so enough of that. Let's go ahead and start creating our draft. So if you look at your draft, you can see that, let's look at the first thing. We'll look at the W12 by 26, and that is a section of a beam. So we want to load in a two-dimensional drawing of a section of a beam. So we could go through and draw each and every one of those lines, but instead what Revit allows us to do is it allows us to find two-dimensional details of certain shapes that are commonly used, and we can load those in and use those instead of having to draw it ourselves. So again, anytime you're going to load anything in, you'll go to Insert. We're going to load a family. So everything we're going to be loading in today is a detail item. And a detail item is just a two-dimensional draft of certain objects. So we'll go to Detail Items. You'll see that it's broken up between different divisions here. So for what we're going to do, everything that we're doing right now for this example is under metals, because we're going to be dealing with wide flange shapes, steel angles, and bolts. So it's all going to be under metals. So for the structural steel framing, the W12 by 26, the 14 by 43, and the 16 by 50, those will all be found under structural steel framing. If you're looking for joists, you can find those under the steel joist framing. And then all connections are found under common work results for metals. So we'll go to structural steel framing here. We can scroll down until we get to AISC wide flange shapes. So these are the shapes that we want to use. You can see you get views either from a section, you get a view from the side, and you can get a view from the top. So let's load our section in first. That's going to be a W12 by 26. So we'll hit Open under AISC wide flange shapes section. Now you can see we have all these different shapes that we can load in. If we scroll all the way down, we can find what we're looking for, our 12 by 26. Just right there. So once you click your 12 by 26, the one you want to load in, we'll hit OK. And again, when we insert families, it looks like nothing happened. You just need to know where to go to find that family. So what that is, that's under Annotate. And these are annotative components. So once we click Component, we can hit the drop down here and we can see all the components we have loaded in. So I've loaded in all the different components you'll need for this example. But you'll have to go through and you'll have to load in a W14 by 43 from the side. You'll have to load in a W16 by 50 from the side. You'll have to load in your L-angled connections. One's called connection 3, one's called connection 4. You'll have to load in your break line. I'll actually go through it with you guys just to make sure we get that. And you'll have to load in A325 bolts from the side. Okay, anyway, so let's go ahead and start making these details. So I'm going to go here and go to AISC wide flange shapes, and we're doing a section. So let's start with the 12 by 26, and you can see now that we have the option just to kind of throw this section anywhere onto the white space here. So I'm just going to click anywhere in our white space and put that section in place. Okay, so at our current scale, our section just looks like 3 solid bold lines. And sometimes when you're not sure what scale you need to be working at yet, it's a good idea to use the thin line view. And it's just also a good idea to understand how to make your views thin line when you want. So if you go to View, and you just click this thin lines here, all it's going to do is just make it so that all of your the line weights essentially don't show up. It's just that everything is a thin line and is easily distinguishable, and you can kind of see how your shape's going to look. That's a pretty good indicator, though, that our scale is much too small for this, and we need to bump it up in size a little bit. Okay, so there's our section. Then we can go ahead and we can draw our 14 by 43 from the side. So again, we'll go to Annotate, Component. You have to make sure that you've loaded in your 14 by 43 from the side. Once you have, I'm just going to draw it over here, just kind of over in space here, and then I'm going to drag it away from my my cross section here. I'm just making my column with my section right here. So again, what I did is I just took it and I just drew a straight line down, and Revit understood that we're trying to draw this this shape, this 14 by 43 from the side. You can see here, once you've drawn it, you can do things like change the length. I'm going to change it to 3 feet. And you can kind of mess with it. You can move it around really easily. And it's really easy to work with. Okay, but anyway, so now we have our 14 by 43 from the side. We have our 12 by 26, it's a section, and we want this section to be put right in the middle there. So I'm going to use the Move command. I'm going to click my section. We use the Move command. I'm just going to move it from that center point right on top to the center point of this column. So you'll notice, and make sure you have hidden line visual style on. If you have wireframe, it's not gonna work quite right for us. So make sure hidden line's on for us. And you can see that when we moved our section, our beam section, over on top of the column, it went behind it. And that's because we placed our beam section first. So if we want to see the beam section, we'll click our beam, and we'll say we want to bring it to the front. So now you can see that it has brought this to the front, so we see it in front of this column. We could also have clicked our column and told our column to go to the back, and that would have done the same thing. Okay, so we have these two shapes. Let's go ahead and draw in our W16 by 15 girder. So again, we'll go to Component. We'll hit our drop down here. We'll find our 16 by 50. And I'm just going to start it right at this corner here and draw it 3 feet over. And we can see if you tried to get an extension here to make that 2-inch gap right off the bat, it's not going to really work out very well for you. Revit is a little finicky with using extensions and certain things like that. So sometimes you'll just have to add an intermediate step. So what I did is I just drew it right on this corner. Now I can click it, hit Move, and move it over 2 inches pretty easily like that. So again, sometimes it takes a little bit of creativity to make sure you can do what you want in Revit because its tools aren't quite as powerful as AutoCAD's. Okay, so we have our 3 structural shapes in there now. Let's go ahead and add in those angles, and we'll start with the L 4x4 by 5/16. So if we want to put those in, again, those are still an annotative component, so still under the Annotate tab. We'll click Component. We'll hit our drop down here, and we'll go and we'll find our angled bolted connection 3 elevation. Again, you could find these under the metals, and then under common work results for metals, and under connections, you'll find L angled bolt connections 3. So you guys can go ahead and find that. And then once you do, we want to choose to use the L 4x4 by 5/16 hex connection. So we'll click that. And then once we have it out here, you'll see that we're placing it right by its center point on the edge of the angle. So if I come over here, I can hover over it, and I can grab that midpoint snap of the beam web. And that'll allow us to align the midpoint of our angle perfectly up with the midpoint of this beam. So we'll click there. And then we want to flip this guy around, and we want to make it so that we have it on the other side as well. So a way you can make these flip around really easily is by using the space bar. And you see by pressing space bar, it flips it 90 degrees every time you press it. So we can just flip it over, get it on the other side, align it with the center of the other angle, and make sure that it's on this line. You'll get those highlighted. You can just click. And there you go. So we have our angle, and we have our angle on each side that's connecting our wide flange shape. So before we get to the bolts, let's go ahead and bring this angle in here as well. So to do that, we'll go back to Annotate Component. And this angle is L angle bolted connection 4, so make sure to find that. And we're wanting to use the 8.5 by 8.5 by 5/16 hex. So this first one here. We'll click that. And now you can see that we're bringing it in. You can see that it's not going to line up nicely for us on the midpoint of this girder. We can't have an extension come over here. So again, I'm just going to click it right at the midpoint here, and I'll just do an intermediate step to move it to the left. So I'm going to lock it to the midpoint of that girder there, and then I'll click our angle, hit move, and just move it to the left here. Okay, so we have all of our angles in place. One thing we can see, though, is with this angle here, if we click this beam, you can see how close those second rows of bolts here, here, and here are getting to the back line of our girder. So that's obviously too much. So if we click this angle here, you can see that you have all of these different values and its properties, and you can also see that you have these different grips here. So if you take this grip and you move it this way, you can see that this LH1 value is changing on us. So let's say we wanted that LH1 value, instead of being 2, let's change it to 3. And that's not right. Let me undo that. That was working earlier. I wonder why it's not. I wonder why 3 is not working. Oh, I did 3 feet is why. We want 3 inches. There we go. Okay, so yeah, make sure you give your little inch mark there. So we do 3 inches, and that'll make it so that moved this another inch away from this edge of the girder here, and it works much better. You can also see that you can change your vertical spacing if you wish. Sometimes you might change it to 3 inches instead of 4 or something. But to stay similar to the drawing that's on Blackboard, we'll go ahead and use the 4 inches or 4-inch spacing there. Okay, cool. So we have these in here now. So all we really have to do now is just send our bolts horizontally across. So I'm going to go in. I'm going to go to Component, and I'm going to go to my bolts here. And you guys are going to have all of these bolts that are showing for me here, except for this one. And we're going to get to what we do with that one here in just a second. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the 1/2 inch. So go ahead and use the 1/2 inch as well, and then we'll get into what we're going to change here in a second. So we'll choose the 1/2 inch bolt, and then when I come, shoot, mine's already changed. I'm going to go ahead and use the 1/2 inch bolt. I'm going to use the next size up. So I'm going to use a 3/4 inch bolt. But you guys use the 1/2 inch bolt, and then I'll show how we change it. So I'll go ahead with a 3/4 inch bolt. So what we want to do is you can see that, oh, that changed it for all my families. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and describe it anyway, what's happening here. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm just going to put my bolt, and I'm going to go back to a 1/2 inch bolt since it changed it for all of them. I'm going to go back to a 1/2 inch bolt, and I'm going to put my bolt right on the edge there. So where it's locking me, I'm going to put it right in line with these bolts, and I'm going to put it right on the edge of that angle. So I'll click there. So you guys should have a body of a bolt coming through here, and I'll show you guys how to get rid of that here in a second. So then we'll click our bolt, and we'll drag it inward until we get to the edge of that angle there. And there we go. So again, you guys should have a kind of a masking area here if you haven't done this yet. And the way we get rid of that actually is if we double click on this bolt, that'll bring you into the family editor. And all we did in class in this family editor is we just selected the 2 lines, and there's a masking region there as well. So just go through and select it all like this, and just hit delete. And then what that'll do is that'll delete all the middle space out of your bolts. Usually when we're drawing bolts, we don't want to see that middle space because that's going to be going through an angle or through a column flange or something like that. So then once you're done with that, you'll hit the Load into Project button. And then that'll change your bolts for you. So you should see now that they come through with no center. And then you can just go through and do the same for all of them. I'm going to copy all of them. So I'm just going to click it, choose the copy command. I'll go from there, line it up there, and then we'll do the same thing. You can keep going through the same command over and over again by hitting enter. And so I'll just hit enter, and then I'll line it up here, and then I'll use my grips here to pull it back there and to pull it right back to there. And then I'll go ahead and copy these 3 here. So however you guys want to do it, I'll let you determine exactly how you want it done. But you just need to make it so you have all of those bolts in their correct location. Okay, so once you have those bolts, let's go ahead and make these break lines. Or actually, before we make the break lines, since those depend on the scale of the drawing, let's make a new sheet for this, and let's put it onto a sheet. And let's see what scale we're going to want this this drafting view to be at. So I'm going to go to my sheets here. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say I want a new sheet. Again, we're going to keep using title block for class, so we'll hit OK. So this sheet I'm going to call Structural Details. I'm going to give it the name. Shoot, I already have. Yeah, I already have one structural detail sheet. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this sheet. But just make a new sheet called Structural Details. You can give it a discipline of structural, so it shows up in your structural views here. And then on this sheet, I'm just going to take, I'm going to open up my sheet here, and I'm going to take my drafting view, and I'm going to put it on this sheet. So you can see now when we put our drafting view on our sheet, it is way too small. 1/4 of an inch is tiny. So let's instead double click here, and let's bump its size up. I think 1 inch equals a foot works pretty well. Or even 1.5 inches equals a foot. Yeah, let's go with 1.5 inches equals a foot. Okay, so now that we've got that, we'll deactivate our view. We can move it around. We can change our title block, our viewport title, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, cool. So this is what we're looking at now. We have our beam/girder to column connection. It's on our sheet. Let's go ahead and finish it up by putting our break lines in and then annotating it. Okay, so let's go back to our drafting view. So we want to add a break line here, and we want to add a break line here. So to do that, we'll go to Annotate, and we want to make an annotative component. So what you guys want to do is you want to load a new family, and you guys want to load the break line family. So let's go to Load Family, just so I can show you guys where it is. Again, it's under Detail Items. This time it's under Division 1 General, though, and a break line is just a general detail. So we'll click that, and it's the only one in there. So we'll choose break line, open it up. Then you should find it in the drop downs of your properties here. You can scroll down, and you can find break line right there. Okay, so we want this break line to line up right in the center. So I'm getting the center grip of that beam section, and I can just click right there. And so what you see is when we click this, we made it so that our masking region was on the other side. And this is where it's important that we make sure that we're in hidden line style, because we want to make sure that masking regions actually mask stuff instead of, you'll see what happens if we turn wireframe on. The masking region doesn't really do anything. So let's make sure we're in hidden line. Okay, so again, we said this masking region is going the wrong way, so it's as simple as just clicking the break line, hitting spacebar a couple times to turn it around, and then there it looks pretty good. Okay, so let's make another one. So we'll go to Component under Annotate, break line. This time we want to flip it vertically, And again, this is one of those things where we can't get an extension nicely from the midpoint. So I'm just going to click it on the midpoint. Then I'll click it. I'll move it over with the arrow keys a few notches. And again, our masking region's on the wrong side, so I'll click it, hit spacebar a couple times to turn that masking region over. Okay, so we have everything done now. All we have to do is annotate it. And annotation is really easy in Revit. So let's go to text here. We're going to start by making some text. We'll hit text. And we're going to use the 3/32 inch Arial. Like I talked about in class, always make sure to just check your properties of your text to make sure it's actually right. Somebody could have named this 3/32 inch Arial, but then changed all the properties of it, and it's not 3/32 inch Arial at all. So let's just hit edit type and just make sure everything looks okay. So we'll come over here, we see it's Arial, we see it's 3/32. We see that its leader will be a 30-degree filled arrow. Again, that's all kind of personal preference. It's not bold, italic, or underline. You guys can read through all that stuff to see what they are. As long as it matches with what it's saying and it matches with what you want, we can just hit OK. And then you can just start typing in what you want. So the first one's a W14 by 43. You can type in another one here. It's like W16 by 50. And I'll let you read what all the other annotations are and fill those in. You can see that you can move them around really easily by clicking them, using the arrow keys. You can grab that move grip. So they're really, really user-friendly. The other thing we want to do is we want to make a multi-leader that shows that these are A325 bolts. So to make a multi-leader, we'll click text. And you can see that you have these options here for multi-leaders. You can either do a 2-segment, a curved, 1-segment, or what we've been doing, no leader. So let's go ahead and do the 2-segment multi-leader. And I'm going to click right next to my, my bolt here. Then I'll bring it up this way, and then I'll send the second segment there. You guys can play with that a little bit more to figure it out. It's pretty easy. And then A325 1/2 inch bolts typical. Right there. Okay. So again, I'll let you guys go through the rest of it. The only other annotation we have is the aligned annotation. So I know we've gone over this earlier, but anyway, we'll go over it really quick again. We'll choose the aligned. Let's see what's already loaded in our project. We either have air handler dimensions, which is something that somebody else was doing. We also have the diagonal dimension. So let's check out this diagonal dimension and see if it works for what we want. Again, I'll let you guys go through, mess with, playing with these. The important ones, though, is our tick marks diagonal, which is the same as our examples. That's good. Our line weight's 1. Our tick mark line weight's 5, which means it's a little heavier. That's fine. We'll scroll down. We can see that our witness line gap is pretty small, but it might work. Again, a lot of that stuff's just playing around with. Our text size, which is the thing that's important. We got 3/32 of an inch. Perfect. Offset, units, all that kind of stuff. You can see bold, italic, underline. Again, stuff you guys can mess around with if you want to. But it looks okay to me. So we'll hit OK, and we'll say we want to go from this outside edge to this edge of the girder there. And we can show that that is 2 inches. So if we want to move just the text, because the text I don't think looks very good up on top of the dimension like that, we can click this and we can grab that little drag right there, and we can drag our text away from it. You see if you get far enough away that there will be a leader that Revit gives it that's a little arc to the dimension. You can make it look like that, or you can get it close enough that that arc doesn't show up. Again, personal preference on how you like your drawing to look. So there's just a few more annotations you guys got to fill out for that, and you should be good. So that's that detail, really quick and easy. The details you guys have to do for homework, you'll have to use joists. You'll also have to use a plumbing drain. So those are some things you guys are going to have to hunt for when you load in all of your components. Okay, so the only other thing we have to do then is look into inserting AutoCAD into Revit. And it's actually really simple. If we want to insert any type of CAD drawing into Revit, we want to make sure we first make it its own detail. Excuse me. We want to make it its own detail. So we'll go to View, and we'll click Drafting View to create a new drafting view. I'm just going to call this Imported CAD, but you guys need to call it, whatever your drawing is. So for example, you guys are loading in your projects. You want to call it like Beam Splice, or Beam to Girder Connection, or Beam to Column Connection, whatever it is. Again, we can leave the scale alone for now, and then mess with it later once we put it onto a sheet, so we can hit OK. Alright, so now, again, we're in a blank drafting space. If we come over here to Insert, you can see we have the option to Import CAD. So if we click that, This allows us to, look through and find a whole bunch of different things. I'm just going to load in the first thing that I see here, which is that wrench in class example we did a few weeks ago. And then you can see here we're looking for DWG files. You can choose different types of files, but we want to do DWG. You can see that you can choose to preserve the colors. So instead of like, if you drew it with like yellows and blues and reds and stuff, you can choose to preserve those. A lot of times when a lot of people will work in AutoCAD in black and then work in Revit in white, and so you'll choose to invert those colors. So if it was like a light yellow, it'll come through as the exact opposite, which will show up on white a lot better. Or you can just choose to turn everything to black and white. I personally prefer this, especially in Revit. I don't like working in color much in Revit. But again, it's a personal preference thing, whatever you guys like to do. You can choose which layers to bring in. You can choose to bring in all the layers, no matter what. You can choose to only bring in the visible layers, or you can tell AutoCAD or tell Revit which specific layers from AutoCAD you want to bring in. Usually, we'll just choose visible, because what's visible in AutoCAD, you probably want visible in Revit as well. And then you just want to tell it to auto-detect the units, and then auto-center to center is perfectly fine for what we're doing. So we'll hit open, and then we can zoom in here, and there is our detail. Again, 1/4 of an inch equals a foot is going to be way too small for a wrench. So we might even go as high as like 3 inches equals a foot. Again, you can always test out your scale by taking it, dragging it onto one of your sheets, and seeing what it looks like. So even that's pretty small. I might just go ahead and draw it to half scale. So that's half the actual size of the wrench on the sheet. But anyway, so you can see it was really easy to import. If something comes through a little wonky, like maybe let's say we don't like how the text looks, or some lines need to be deleted. For example, like this center line, it just came through as a solid line. So we can just go ahead and delete that. But if we want to mess with it at all, we can click it. You can see that it's all one object currently. If we want to actually mess with the different individual lines, we can come up here and we can choose to explode it. So we'll click explode, and now you can see that we have individual lines for everything that was drawn. You can see here that this came through as just a solid line. You can come over here and you can choose to change it to the Revit center line instead of the AutoCAD center line, and then we actually get a good looking center line there. You can see you can go through, you can delete lines that you might not want, and I'll let you guys play around with that to figure out what looks nice. So again, what you guys are going to do for your assignment is you're going to take your 3 different drawings that you did for your project, your 3 2D drawings you did for your project, load them in, and then put those on sheets as well. Again, just looking at this, being picky, we made a new drafting view, but again, it threw it under coordination and question mark, question mark, question mark. If we want to change it over to structural details, we'll come over here to discipline, structural, subdiscipline, 000 details, and now it moved it in the same location there. So you'll notice that I put a couple different details on the same sheet, and usually that's what you'll do, especially with details. You'll want to make it so that you have like 4 details per sheet, because if you start making 1 detail per sheet, that scale is just going to be ridiculously big and unnecessary. So that should pretty much do it for your guys' assignment. One thing I'll go over really quickly, and it's pretty easy, is for your plumbing trap, you guys are going to have to draw that trap yourself. And so you're going to have to draw some regions and some detail lines. And I'm just going to draw a region and detail lines over here really quickly, and it's pretty easy. All it is under annotate. You'll see you have detail lines here, and you'll have filled regions here. If you just click detail line, you can see that you have the option between all of these different line types. Usually we're going to stick to medium lines, but if you can switch it over to thin lines or wide lines, depending on what you're trying to get at. So I'm just going to start with medium lines, and then you can see all your different styles of drawing. You can draw a line, you can draw a rectangle, you can draw inscribed polyline, circumscribed polyline, circle. I'll let you guys look through all those. And then it's just as easy as, clicking for lines. For arcs, you see that you have the start, end, radius command. So we'll like start, end, radius. And so you guys can play around with those different drawing techniques. It's very similar to how CAD works. It's just that your line style is controlled here, and what you're drawing is controlled here. So it doesn't work quite as nicely as CAD when you have like layers and things like that, but it's still a pretty nice drafting feature, especially when you're doing things as simple as this. The other thing is a region. So if you're doing a filled region, you'll see that it kind of works as like making an extrusion or something. You have to go through the whole process, then hit the check mark. But anyway, you'll see that you have the option of what your lines will look like. You can choose how you want to draw. So I'm going to say maybe I'm going to use wide lines for this region. I'm going to make a rectangle. Just draw it like that. And then you'll see over here in the properties of it is the different fills you can choose from. So there's a whole bunch of different fills loaded in so far. Let's say I just wanted a plain white one. It looks like I don't see white here. So if you want to make your own fill, you can just choose one of them. We can go to Edit Type and duplicate it. We'll call it white. And then we'll change the color right here. So instead of being black, we can just change it to white. Hit OK, and finish it. And now we have a region that has wide lines around the outside, and it has a white fill. And the reason we use regions a lot of times is to kind of cover up things that we don't want. So you can see once we move this region over the shape that I've drawn here, if we bring it to the front, it'll cover it up. So that's usually the reason we'll use regions. You can also use regions to make different fill patterns. You can see, like for this family, they made a region that had the steel cross-section fill pattern that was coming through there. And you can click here, and if you want to see some of those other ones, you can kind of play around with the ones we have. For example, like I think there's a concrete one. You can see what that'll look like. You guys can play around with all the different regions and see which ones work for you. So that should help you guys with the homework. I don't think there's anything else that you guys should run into. It should be pretty straightforward. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this a little bit easier week of Revit, because next week's going to be quite a bit harder.